From your evening to come and join us this evening for this discussion, and we definitely seek your input. Just a little background of why we're here and how we've gotten to this point is there's been a number of people for many years working towards getting fiber optics to the entire Red Oak and Montgomery County area. We've continued to hit roadblocks along the way, and we started down the path again here 2 years ago, and I was working with Farmers Mutual Telephone, looking at how could we get them expanded over into Red Oak. I see that as my position in trying to grow and expand our local. I met these gentlemen at the Community Broadband Network Action Network conference that they hosted up in Des Moines a couple months ago, and I just knew that this was the skill sets of individuals we needed to help us make a decision for Red Oak and the rest of Montgomery County. They bring great knowledge from city administration over with Todd to marketing and all kinds of things. They're going to tell you a little bit more about what they do. But I'm really pleased to have them as our team and helping us figure this out for Red Oak. By all means, this will be an open conversation after their presentation, and we look forward to everyone contributing to the discussion. So with that, I'll turn this over to Curtis.
All right. Thank you. You may be wondering about the microphone, and obviously it's not really needed in a room this size, but we are trying, keyword being trying, to put this meeting out, this presentation out on Facebook Live. And I don't know if any of you have ever used Facebook Live. It's a neat little tool. Got a little camera there that's supposed to be putting it out on Facebook Live. The challenge we have tonight is the internet's kind of slow. It's the upload speed that is the problem here. And so what a great opportunity to demonstrate in real life some of the challenges of broadband in rural America. As Shauna mentioned, I'm Curtis Dean. I got my start in telecommunications up in Spencer, Iowa, and I was the telecommunications public information director, communications marketing person there when we built a city-owned utility back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And so I was involved in that, but I was also involved in a lot of the day-to-day operational stuff, implementing new products and services, that sort of thing. And then I went to work for the state association called the Iowa Association of Municipal Utilities, which basically works with city-owned utilities across the state. And I served that role as broadband coordinator until a few years ago, and then I started working on my own as a consultant. Todd, who's over there, is got a deep background in community management, utility management, economic development, entrepreneurship, you name it. So we work together on a lot of these projects, and so I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you a little bit about broadband tonight. So the idea of this presentation is not necessarily for you just to stand up here and you listen to me. I've got a few slides, but they're honestly not magic, and you're certainly not going to be like witnessing a great movie like you would stream on Netflix, if you could stream it, that is. So instead, what we're going to do is start out by just asking you all to maybe share what your experiences have been with broadband service. If I could just maybe first, how many of you live inside the Red Oak city limits? Okay, so a pretty good percentage. And how many of you live outside the city limits? Oh, it's almost an equal split. Well, that's fantastic. So there's a number of things that are going on right now that are different people pulling on different ropes, but all going in the same direction. And the goal here is to bring better broadband for the entire rest of Montgomery County. I'll show you a map here in a little bit, but you guys here in the middle part of the county in that 623 exchange, the old CenturyLink telephone exchange, unfortunately you are the only places in the county that don't have fiber optics all the way to the home. And fiber is the gold standard for connectivity in our modern era. With fiber optic connection, you have virtually unlimited bandwidth, very few slowdowns. Your upload speeds can be much closer, if not equal to your download speeds. So there's a lot of opportunities there, and that's kind of why this process started. The folks at FMTC have been trying to figure out a way to build fiber out in parts of this area. and they've been able to try to access some federal funding that's available to do that. That same federal funding is not available for within the city limits of Red Oak, Iowa, because Red Oak is considered served according to the FCC's definition. And so that's why this project was launched as a way to try to help not only measure, where everybody's at as far as their broadband uses and their experiences, but to help frame up some ideas about how a project in Red Oak could potentially be financed, where that money could come from, and how we could work together on a plan that hopefully would see Farmers Mutual out of Stanton be able to be a partner in that. So that's the purpose of the study. Anybody have any stories they want to share about their broadband services, either out in the country or in town, as we get started here? I'll ask for a show of hands. How many of you feel like your service is as good as you need it today? Crickets? How many of you feel that your internet speeds are as fast as you'd need them to be? How about reliability? How many of you feel that your service is reliable? Okay, we got one. Yay, thank you. Those are some of the reasons we're having this discussion, right? Because especially here in Red Oak, but in the rural part of the exchange, choices are limited. In the rural part of the 623 exchange, you got one choice for telephone service, and that's CenturyLink. Of course, we all have cell phones now, so that's not as big of a deal. But in parts of that rural area, CenturyLink is the only wire to your home, and it can't deliver internet at speeds that we really consider what we need in the 21st century. So one provider, one choice, not very good. When you get into the city of Red Oak, you have two providers. One provider, we just mentioned CenturyLink. The other provider is Mediacom. And both of them have different types of network. They use different technology, but none of you raised your hand when you thought it was serving your needs. So that's why we think we can try to work together to come up with a solution to maybe deliver that better broadband so that people in Red Oak, people in that area just around Red Oak in that 623 exchange are being served, as well as the people that are being served in Stanton and other communities near you. Anybody else want to throw out a story, horror story or otherwise? Yeah.
Well, we're not serviced at all.
Okay.
We have to have satellite internet,
Yep.
and it's horrible. It's just horrible. We can't watch Netflix. Half the time, I can't even access my email unless I'm on my phone.
How many of the rest of you have satellite internet? Okay. So it's interesting. Satellite internet is, for many people, it's better than nothing, right? But it's not going to do everything that the modern household really wants from an internet connection, right? It's probably fast enough to do some of the simple things you need internet with, but streaming could be an issue because of speeds. The upload speeds are quite a bit slower. There's a lot of latency, so some applications you use, that round trip of the data can be really a problem. But the biggest problem with the satellite services is they have very tight data caps. And so even, I just saw an ad for one of them the other day, and it was bragging about unlimited data, but then in the fine print it said, well, that's, of course, you can have as much data as you want. We just slow it way down if you go over 10 gig a month or whatever. Well, the average household today is using between 300 and 400 gigabits per month.
Yeah, we're only allowed 25.
25 gigs of data. That's about
3 days.
Yeah, 3 days, or
I'm dead serious.
yeah.
My household is
With streaming, it just goes by really fast. It's not a good solution for streaming. Yes, back there.
I tried to watch a 21-second Facebook video and it took 6 minutes and 9 seconds.
A 21-second video took over 6 minutes because of the buffering. The little wheel of death, as some people call it. Yeah, it's the most annoying part of that kind of connection. Was that a satellite connection or? Okay. How many of you have DSL service? How's that working for you? Is it reliable at least? Not if it storms? Does it storm in Iowa? Okay. reminds me of like when I was a kid growing up, early 70s, we were served by a rural electric cooperative that will not be named, but it wasn't anywhere around here. And the joke was always well, there's a dark cloud coming, our power's going to go out. And because they operated, they hadn't done a lot of their network replacement yet. And unfortunately, it's still like that for some people when it comes to telecommunications. So how many of you here work from home or try to work from home? Okay. Part-time, full-time? Part-time? Side business sort of thing, or?
Work allows me to work.
Perfect. So you can remotely work from your job. So the 21st century economy is moving a lot from work being a place you go to being a thing you do, and you do it wherever you want to, because if you have broadband connections that are reliable and fast enough, you can work wherever. Todd and I both work from home. We both have fast fiber-fed internet connections. That makes it really easy. Yeah?
Yeah, I have better internet using my phone as a hotspot than this house.
Yeah. Do any of you have to ever turn your phone hotspot on to get better internet? Okay. Okay. Well, the cellular providers love you for that, by the way, but your data packages can get eaten up pretty quickly there. Even the carriers that advertise unlimited data, unlimited means something different than what we all think it means in the English language. So, yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, Joy.
Billy Norris, I came back to Red Oak about 5 years ago to start a small engineering firm. I spent easily the first 2 years fighting with my internet service provider in my office, and I had over 8 visits from the techs to try to fix that internet. I lost clients having video chat with these people around the country. I'm not going to name the company, but it's just, it's just not acceptable to run a small business in Red Oak and have that kind of service.
Yeah. We hear this story all the time, right? Because Todd and I do projects like this in a lot of small to medium-sized communities in Iowa. And the big problem you have in those types of communities is if you're served only by the big incumbent legacy phone and cable companies, it's highly likely your service is going to lag behind service that is provided by independently owned companies like Farmers. There are a number of privately owned operators out there that also do an excellent job, and then there are some city or municipally owned providers that are out there that are also providing better service. So it's like they don't really have a financial incentive to rebuild their networks to give you better service. They can do some things, so they can offer maybe a higher speed, but if their core network is still old and it's not maintained well, then it might be a challenge to deliver that speed on a reliable, dependable basis.
I'd just also add that one of the reasons that tonight is important and why we're trying to do it on Facebook when we have these community conversations is there's no natural stakeholder group for people to share their stories. I mean, you can't just go to a small group and hear one little story. And it seems like with telecommunications, historically, it's always been, well, I know somebody who's trying to work from home, so I'm going to try to make a bigger deal out of it. But it's only one person. When you all hear each other's stories, repeat the stories. That's the biggest thing you can do is so people can get the scale of, oh, I didn't know we had people that really want to work from home and can't. Or we try to educate in these sessions also, because we try to get some broader perspective, such as when the state of Tennessee put state money into this, they found the number of 1099s in their communities went up. GDP goes up in the communities where things proliferate like this.
Yeah.
And so housing values go up because people are using second incomes off of their broadband connection, and they're doing it all around America. So, we're trying to educate while we do these, and so telling the stories are important.
Yeah.
Because you need to educate each other about where you want to go for the next 10 years.
Right, exactly. So I'm going to share a couple of statistics with you. Now, these are statistics from a website called broadbandnow.com, and what they do is they examine broadband access in communities all over the country, and then they also capture speed test data. Some of you have probably taken the broadband assessment that we're doing as part of this study, and there's a speed test component to that. I'll talk about those results in a minute. But when Broadband Now did that speed test analysis of the speed tests from, looks like 5,093 from people who said they had an IP address in Red Oak. The average download in Red Oak, not Fort Dodge, is 24.64 megabits per second. That's according to their statistics, and that's slower than the average in Iowa and a lot slower than the national average. According to their statistics, they say Red Oak is the 54th most connected city in Iowa. That's in terms of the percentage of the population that at least has internet. Doesn't mean they're happy with it, doesn't mean it's fast, but they have internet. That statistic's not really that valuable in your case. But there's only about 15.4% of the people in Red Oak only have one ISP that can serve them. How many of you live in Red Oak and you only have one ISP that will actually can serve you even if you wanted to switch? Anybody in the room? There are some neighborhoods where one provider will build service and provide service there, but another provider may not build the network there because they can't get their money back fast enough. So it's a real challenge. Now, in addition to these statistics, we took a look at, in our broadband assessments that we're doing, and these are those online speed tests that I mentioned. We don't have a lot yet, but the ones we do, these are the average download speeds and upload speeds for the different carriers in Red Oak particularly. As you can see, Mediacom has pretty good download speeds from the people that have taken this test online, and actually a little higher than the state averages that I showed you before. Download speeds are a lot faster than upload speeds, and that is because of the technology. Now, if you're streaming videos and stuff like that, download is what you really need. If you're working from home, if you're trying to Facebook Live like we are right here, that upload speed is a challenge for you. That's what you really need. And a lot of businesses are demanding and needing more upload speeds. Gamers are needing more upload speeds. Anybody that uses any kind of where you're pushing content out from your computer to the internet, it's important. And their download speeds are quite a bit less than their upload speeds. But we compare that to the speed tests people have taken for CenturyLink, and as you can see, they're a lot better than what CenturyLink is delivering right now. And so these are the statistics so far. We hope to get a lot more of these before we close the study, and I'll give you my sales pitch about taking the survey here in a little bit. This is a map from the FCC, their latest version of the broadband map, and this shows the area around, probably most of Montgomery County, but the area certainly around Red Oak. Where you see yellow on this, those are areas that don't have fiber. Where you see gray on this are areas that do have fiber to the home. And you'll see that you're kind of a lake full of no fiber or an island of no fiber in a sea of fiber to the home. All because you've got carriers like Farmers, and there are others, that have been building out fiber consistently over the past few years to serve their customers, both in town and out of town. So that's the challenge for your area here, the 623. That's why this study is focused on that slice of the county, because right now that's the only place in the whole county that doesn't have fiber to the home. And if you filled those gaps in, then Montgomery County could be one of the first counties anywhere in the Midwest to have all fiber service everywhere. So that's kind of the dream. At least that's what we hope to achieve. So I'll go through this quickly with some of the reasons why we think that better broadband is important for people. Education, jobs, healthcare, quality of life, and really it matters for everything having to do with the community's future. Kids are bringing home Chromebooks or laptops from school, and they need to do homework at home. If the internet's slow, if the internet's down, if mom and dad don't have access to internet, then they're having to compromise. They're having to go to, a lot of schools have had to keep their buildings open later so kids can get homework done. You see kids doing homework at McDonald's occasionally, because any place that has free Wi-Fi is going to be a place where they can get some work done. If the child is uploading an assignment right at that moment that an outage just happens, they may be behind because now they're going to have to scramble in the morning and do it when they get back to school. Jobs, we talked about people earning incomes from home. That's an increasingly important part of what makes up a community's quality of life. About 29% of the people in the survey answers so far say they work from home at least part-time. So that's a pretty good number, and that number is growing consistently as more and more people do remote work, they start side businesses, and even if it's not your full-time job, it might be something that you get significant additional income from. So for example, in this statistic it shows that a significant number of people don't make any money by their internet connectivity, but a lot of people are, and those numbers continue to grow as well. So I talk about better broadband as if we all agree on what it is, but often there is disagreement. Providers will sometimes tell you, well, our internet's as good as you need it. You don't need anything better than that. So I want to talk a little bit about this is my personal opinion, my definition of what we mean by better broadband service. Well, first of all, it should be fast. The internet should be fast enough to be able to suit your needs. Doesn't mean everybody needs 100 megabits per second all the time or a gigabit per second all the time, but some consumers do, and they should be able to have access to that if they do. It should be reliable. This is becoming an increasingly big pain point for people. The Wheel of Death, as you were mentioning, to watch that 20-second video, the reliability that happens when the internet goes down at inopportune times. We did a meeting like this in a community up in north central Iowa a couple of years ago, and the owner of the restaurant where we had the meeting came up and said, "Oh, I'm glad you're talking about this. Every day during the lunch rush, that's when my internet goes down, and now I can't run credit cards." And some people leave and they say they're going to come back and pay, and they don't, and they have to wait for the next day for them to come and pay. And it's just, it can be a real bottom line hurt for businesses. It should be affordable. Now, affordability is a difficult subject because some people think, well, affordable to me is free, or affordable to me isn't the same as affordable to the next person. But what I mean by affordability is that most people in the community should financially be able to handle the cost of at least a decent internet connection. It doesn't mean everybody can afford a gigabit. It doesn't mean everybody can afford 100 meg, but there should be some level of service that is affordable, that it meets most people's needs. But it won't be free. Can't be free. Universally available is very important. And I mentioned before, different technologies for different types of networks work differently. So a DSL network like CenturyLink has, the farther you get away from their central office or their nearest fiber point, the slower your speeds. So you might have some people that in one area the speed is okay, and a block away because of the routes it's really bad. So cable networks like Mediacom operates here in town do have the ability to deliver better speeds to a wider group because of the way they're constructed, but the challenge becomes there that it's a shared network and it's a lot of sharing going on, and so when you have that happen, sometimes it is some areas of town where the customers are less concentrated are going to have a great experience. Other areas of town where there's a lot of customers operating off of the same fiber connection, they're going to have slowdowns. Fiber networks are designed from the ground up to provide much better connections, and if you build them, the idea would be try to build them to everybody that's going to need it. And finally, this is another big pinch point for people. How many people feel their current ISP is responsive to their needs and customer friendly? That's all.
Especially when it breaks.
Especially when it breaks, right? See, it's too bad that that's laughable, but it really is. And that story is told everywhere, not just in Red Oak, Iowa, but a lot of places that I talk to. In contrast, you talk to people who are served by one of these smaller, independently owned companies like FMTC that have a strong presence in the community. They care about the community because they actually live and work here. They're going to be much more responsive to your needs. Doesn't mean you always get what you want, It doesn't mean you're always going to be exactly happy. But I always think the measure of a company, a provider in this case, ISP, is how they treat you when things go wrong, not how things work when they're going right. And if they treat you well, they respond quickly, they don't make you wait 2 days to correct an outage, they don't make you wait for 10 of your neighbors to also call in the outage in order for them to roll a truck. If they're more responsive to your needs, you're going to be a lot happier. And those customer satisfaction levels with some of the bigger companies, in fact, are just abysmal.
Well, and I guess I would add two things. Number one, back in it's only been, I'd say, the last 10 years, the tipping point of where this is, instead of fast, you would use voltage for electricity. But these same conversations were going on in the 1930s and 40s in Iowa about electricity.
Right.
And it wasn't until there was a tipping point of people using it for productive uses that the lack of it became a problem. And if you had a bad electrical provider and your business was down, you didn't even think twice. You weren't even going to go try to talk to the power company, right? Now today, you expect the Iowa Utility Board to not tax your business by making you have bad electricity. Broadband's getting to that point where it is a tax on you if you are trying to do something productive. If you don't have access to it, if you have to wait 4 hours and you have to shut down your business, you're self-employed, and wait on the cable company to come fix you 3 days later. I mean, these are the things that's going on, I think, in this modern economy that are parallel to what prior generations went into. I used to think it was hyperbole in the 1990s when they were talking about you're going to see that parallel, but I think the day is here. We're seeing it in enough rural communities where they know that the lack of one of those is a problem.
Yeah, it's unfortunate in a way that we have here in the United States, we have the most reliable electric grid in the world as far as energy. You know when you turn that switch on, that light's going to come on, unless it's burned out, of course, or somebody threw the breaker or a squirrel got in the transformer. But you know it's there. The other thing is, you don't have to make these little decisions with your home electricity, right? You don't have to say, well, I really need to cook dinner, but I'll probably have to go unplug the refrigerator. I don't want to overload my electrical connection. You probably have never had to yell at the kids to say, put down your computer because I need to mix this bowl of batter for a cake. No, you've got all the power you need and when you need it. So it's become so you don't even think about it. You don't think about, telecom we talk about in terms of your internet is 100 meg per second or your 100 or gigabit or whatever. Well, we don't talk about that in the electric world because it's just there. You get a bill at the end of the month, and if you used a lot, you pay a little more, and if you didn't use a lot, you don't pay as much. But you always got all the energy you need when you need it. And that's how we built the electric grid, but that's not how telecommunications has been built, mainly because it's been pretty piecemeal, lots and lots and lots of different companies and very little regulatory oversight.
And it's not just that these things need to happen now, but the network that is built for you, because your market's going to have a network over the next 30 years. Someday we'll build something that does this, but the question is going to be whether or not what is built will do this 5 years from now, 10
Right.
years from now, or whether the technology cycle overcomes you to where you're always behind. So understanding that you're in control as a community of these things, that it's not up to some governmental body. It is your market that will drive these things happening. And how you expect things is what gets delivered.
Right. So one of the things that we always talk about when we come out and talk to people in communities that feel like their service isn't very good is, okay, that's great. Well, what the heck can you do about it? Does complaining work? Maybe not so far. Well, so there are a couple of three general approaches that a community can take if they are trying to get a better broadband in their community. Number one, they can try to push those providers that already exist in your town or area to do better, to improve their networks, improve their access, improve their customer service. That can work sometimes, but it's much harder to work because these companies that are larger don't just have piles of cash lying around to go out and put out fires every time somebody says their internet's too slow. They've got a limited amount of money, they've got a lot of area to spend it in, and they're going to do it as piecemeal as possible because they just can't do it all. The comparison I always make is if the manager or the CEO of CenturyLink says, you know what, I feel so bad for those people in Red Oak, Iowa. We're going to go out and we're going to build fiber to the home in Red Oak, Iowa, and those people are going to be so happy they're going to love us forever. Well, first of all, the guy wouldn't have a job tomorrow because the stakeholders would look and say, why are you throwing all this money at Red Oak, Iowa when we need to keep the lights on over here in all these other towns? There's just not enough money for all that to go around to all those communities. So that's why we see a lot of other more either homegrown or collaborative partnerships that are filling in these gaps. The second one I have here is attract a new provider. And that would be the idea of another company coming into your community, building a network, operating it, and providing superior service. That's been a hard thing for communities your size to make happen in the past. It's starting to get easier just because there are more and more companies that are looking to expand and have some access to money to build things. So the idea of attracting a new provider now is a lot easier climb than it used to be, especially if you got the right people that you can possibly partner with. The third one up here is do it yourself, and I won't spend a lot of time on that, but there are 25 communities in Iowa that have actually gone out, formed a utility, a city-owned utility, and built networks. Fiber to the home, of course, is what you would build in today's world. That works in some communities. It doesn't always work in every community. And it's usually a kind of a move of last resort if there are just no other options. If you've tried 1 and 2 here and you're not getting anywhere with it, then you might consider that. And cooperatives are another option, which is kind of a new provider model. You also see a lot of kind of melded together options where, I'll give you an example, just not that far from here, Adair up by I-80, they wanted fiber in the community. They had fiber all around the community by a telephone company, Casey Mutual. Casey Mutual said, yeah, we'd love to build fiber to the home there, but we're spending, we've got so much capital to spend, and we got to build out our own exchanges, and we got to take care of our rural area that we already are obligated to. So the city, first they had an election and formed a municipal utility. Then the city basically is entering into a partnership where the city will build the network and own the network and pay for the network. They'll sell revenue bonds or bank loans essentially to build that network. Casey Mutual will provide services over the network, and they're going to pay a payment back to the city to offset the cost of the debt, kind of a lease payment. And that over the period of time, eventually the goal would be when all that debt, the city has paid for its debt, it has no real reason to want to own that network anymore. They can work some agreement out where they sell that network back to Casey Mutual, or if there's another company that, Casey Mutual doesn't want to do it. But
in the state of Nebraska, they're not allowed to do that municipal utility, but like the city of Lincoln attracted a provider by just doing conduit.
Right.
So there's
different ways you can approach it. The key is keep the options open, and part of that, it's always easier when you've got a provider that would be a good partner. And it seems to us here in your area, you certainly have a company that would be potentially a good partner. Each of these options have advantages and disadvantages. I won't get into a lot of detail on this, but in some communities, they don't have a problem with borrowing money and building a $5 million, $8 million, $10 million network. They're doing it in Vinton, Iowa right now. Pella, Iowa is going to do one next year. New Hampton, Iowa is going to be doing one pretty soon. But not every community wants to do that. So communities that there's really not a public outcry to let's do this city and let's borrow money and build a network and own it, that's where you have to get creative and try to identify potential partnerships. So some of the companies that are out there that are helping solve these broadband deficits across Iowa and across America include municipal utilities, like I mentioned. Harlan is is one of the closer ones to your area. You've got community-based providers, telephone cooperatives, and mutuals. They've been in the phone business a very long time. They've been serving their small rural areas and communities for a very long time. They know the business, and they also have a connection to their communities. So like FMTC is an example of that. You also have RECs. MV Link is a company up in northeast Iowa that is an electric cooperative, and they're building fiber to the home in their electric service territory. Problem with them is they didn't try to collaborate with anybody else. They just went in and did it. So there are areas in northeast Iowa where there are 2 fiber connections, one from the local telephone cooperative and one from the electric cooperative.
There's one in northwest Missouri that has a really good footprint on doing rural electric and broadband.
Right. And then, you know, there are these, what I call the private overbuilders. These are companies that have money. They know how to build networks and run them, and they're out there building in cities like Iowa City, Dubuque. It was just announced 2 days ago that a company called MetroNet Fiber out of Indiana is going to build fiber to the home in Ames. And Ames City had been in the process of looking at a feasibility study, maybe having an election, doing all that stuff. MetroNet found out, oh, this is a town that has a problem. They did their own little study, figured out it was a good market. They're going to come and build fiber to the home. The challenge there, they haven't guaranteed where they're going to build it. If they're just going to pick off the high income neighborhoods or they're going to build it community wide, we don't know yet. But that's an example of some of these private companies that are starting to go out there and build these networks. Just quick, show you this map. This is the state of Iowa, and these are the municipal broadband networks. Now, although a lot of these towns are, you know, they build a publicly owned, city-owned network operated as a utility, in almost every case, they're partnering with somebody. You see Lennox down there, not that far from here. They've been partnering with Farmers Mutual from day one. You see others on here up in Harlan. They work with a couple of the telephone cooperatives in that area, and they share video, they share voice switching. Almost all of these, they look like an island, but in almost every cases, they're partnering, they're collaborating, because there's safety in numbers, and why duplicate something that a trusted, known, established provider is already doing? If you can partner with them, it's a win-win for everybody. So the real thing I want to get across here, because this is one of the things we're trying to stir up interest in, is if you haven't already, we would sure love it if you would go to the website that we set up for our study. It's ourbroadbandfuture.com. You see the address there. It's on these little pieces of paper that were handed out to you. So if you haven't taken that yet, we encourage you to do so. The reason we encourage you to do so is we need more survey responses in order to really get a better gauge for what the community's attitudes are about their existing service, their openness and interest in a new provider, what they're using the internet for, and what issues they're having with it, and maybe they think it's great. So we really want to encourage people to take that survey. So on this website, this ourbroadbandfuture.com Red Oak, you have a residential survey and a business survey. So if you are a business owner, we want you to take both. Take your residential survey, take your business survey. What we're trying to avoid is 5 people in the same house all taking the survey. We like maybe 1 person in each household, probably the person who writes the check at the end of the month, to take that survey. The other piece of this is a broadband assessment. I mentioned that before. That actually, you go in, you identify your geographic location, and you do a speed test. And that speed test, we can attach then that this person has this provider, they live at this location, and their speed test and their other characteristics were this. And that's to hopefully help. And then we forget who you are. So Shauna will never see who did what. That data is all going to be kept secret. But the goal there is really just in general to identify, are there areas that have really bad internet? Now, you may think that, well, within the city of Red Oak, it's probably pretty consistent, but it's not always. We're doing the same assessment in another city here in Iowa. We divided the city up into 5 zones because it's big enough. And they had one zone where the internet speed tests were all running about half. And we brought this to the attention of the community leaders we're working with, and they said, well, that's That's a lower income area of town, so it's probably either one of the providers never invested there because they didn't think they'd get their money back, or people can't afford internet or can't afford a higher speed. So that helped them identify, okay, maybe this is an area that we can target, in their case, maybe to bring in another provider to take care of their needs. So if you haven't done this already, please do it. You can do it on your phone, or you can go to the website on a computer. Yeah, how many have in the room? Great. The rest of you got homework now. So,
Invite your friends and your family to do it as well.
yes.
Tell us, get our numbers up. We've got a good turnout so far, but we
Yeah.
need more.
Yeah, we'd like to get at least 120 to 150 more surveys. When you do survey work, you've got to have enough to be able to say that it's really a good example, a good sample of the community. If the sample isn't good enough, then it's not as accurate, and then it's harder to draw conclusions from it. Some of the questions on there ask you to evaluate your provider, right? So one question is, would you recommend your ISP, internet service provider, to a friend or colleague? That's a really key important measure, because if nobody is recommending a company to friends and neighbors, colleagues, church friends, whatever, that means that provider is probably not doing a very good job for that customer. So we ask that about ISPs, telephone companies, cable companies, and then we ask a question in there: if a new provider were to build broadband in Red Oak and provide superior service at a competitive price, how likely would you be to switch to that new provider? There's a lot of variables there, right? Because you don't know the price yet, you don't know who the provider is, there's a lot of questions there, but it's really just trying to frame up how likely, are you open to that idea? Or maybe you're so loyal to your current provider, the satellite provider, you just love them, and you like that you're really part of the space program. You're like, you are. That you don't want to switch. So that's another way to measure that. So all that data will be collected. We'll be providing a report back to MCDC. Then hopefully that will help them in their efforts to figure out a way to improve these services in areas where they're not very good right now. So.
And there's two real economic reasons that data is important. One, we're talking about attracting a new provider, but anybody that wants to enter into the market and go head-to-head against the two incumbents wants to have some better assurance that there's a market there.
Right.
And the people who finance whoever does that want to have some assurance. It's two separate, sometimes it's one group where the investors, some people have to borrow money, and the banks want to know. This is the data that they are being told that they need to collect if you're going to invest. Because there are 10 years ago, 15, it was really difficult to get financing for these type of projects. Even municipals had problems. And once everybody got comfortable that the data coming out of the market studies was reliable enough compared to the take rates 5 years down the road, then they became more willing to borrow, or more willing to lend. And so the risk premium came down on these bonds quite a bit. Back in the early day, I remember hearing about 2007, 8, 9.
Oh gosh, yeah.
We were looking at 9% interest. Well, these projects don't work at 7 or 9% interest. You get that down with good market data to 6 or 7, you've got a different, a different lender. So, or a different investor.
Right.
So
exactly.
that's why this data can sit there for a while in the interest rate environment we're in, and we'll see exactly how that can help.
So how many of you have ever went to a bank to apply for a mortgage? Right? So you don't walk in and sit down with your local community banker and say, I need a new house, lend me $150,000, and just walk out with a mortgage. You go in and say, I need a new house, and they say, well, show us the house, tell us what the assessed value of the house is. We need your proof of income, right? So all this data we're collecting here is designed to help create information that can be used by someone, because you can't snap your fingers and build a fiber network. It costs a lot of money. And we need to be able to have enough data to present to somebody who's going to loan somebody that money to say, this is a good investment. These people, there'll be a high enough take rate in this community that if we lend them the money to build this network, that they'll be able to pay their loan back and have money left over to keep everybody happy. That's the reason we're gathering this data. If it were as easy as just saying, okay, give me money, I need to build a fiber network, it would have been done a long time ago. And as I may have mentioned before, part of the challenge that you face within the city limits of Red Oak is there's really no federal or state programs, grants, or loans that are available to the city because the city is already considered served with broadband. And they are reserving all those federal funds to areas that are considered unserved with broadband. Yes?
What about the rural areas? Programs available for the out of
Great. I'm going to repeat your question for the people that may be watching on TV, assuming the internet's still up. And that is, what are programs available for, if not in Red Oak, but outside of Red Oak? That's a really good question. There are a couple of areas, programs that are available, and carriers, companies are able to access those through the, there's a program called the FCC Reconnect program. There's also a state of Iowa broadband grant program, and both of those can be used in areas that are considered unserved. And in fact, I think it's clear that there are already people trying to accomplish that in this area.
Highly competitive.
They're very competitive, right?
Especially in there.
Right. So there's not enough money to pay for every network for everybody that wants one. So you have to have a very, very good proposal, and they have to feel that that money is going to really solve a problem. If it's going to do is take their internet from 5 megabits per second to 10 megabits per second, that's probably not going to do very well on the grant scoring. But if you're going to go from nothing to 100 meg in fiber to the home, wow, that grant application, that loan application is probably going to be more well received. Yes, sir.
Do you have any idea of the typical timeline where Red Oak sits today to where, how long it could take in years until all of this can be implemented?
Sure.
On a countywide basis?
Yeah, so timelines. Well, the easy part in figuring out is construction, right? I shouldn't say easy, but it's probably easier to estimate how long it takes to actually build a fiber network. And that might take, in Red Oak, maybe a year or two. But it's all that legwork you got to do to get there. And a lot of it is coming up with a plan, figuring out where the money's coming from, figuring out who the partners are, who's involved in this, executing this plan, and then going through all those steps. If a community like Red Oak wanted there to be any public involvement or ownership, then you have to have an election. Because under Iowa law, if you're going to spend money and own any assets for infrastructure, you got to have a referendum to pass. That takes some time to do too. So there are a lot of steps. You know, it might be if you charged out of this room and everybody had a plan, you might take 2 years to get everything done. It might take longer than that. It's really hard to tell. And then there's the weather. We can't do anything about that. So.
And if we do nothing other than what we have currently, it could take up to 10 or 15 years.
Right.
Depending on neighborhoods that would want to buy into service or such.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is figure out a solution that can get us to that 3-year mark or less. So, and that would be fiber to dedicated fiber from the plant directly to every home and business in our entire rest of the county. We would be the first county in the state of Iowa and the Midwest to have fiber to every home and business. That is a huge attraction for young professionals, veterans, retired veterans. Veterans retired very young. They start up their own businesses. We're so close to the Offutt Air Force Base. Also looking at alumni, wanting to try to attract alumni back. They can bring their businesses with them. So as we're looking ahead of one of our #1 most important things for Montgomery County and Red Oak is increasing our population base. We've got to get our population base back up so that we can attract retailers and attract business and grow business and industry. And so as we look to do that, we need to have, this is an incredible tool. As Curtis mentioned, it adds value to your home. There's been numbers thrown out as much as $6,000 valuation to a home by having fiber optics to your home. So it does increase your home value. So for Montgomery County, this is just a really, really important tool that we need to be able to offer. I work with realtors all the time. I work with our business and industry who are hiring and offering jobs to people. And I know where people are choosing to live. And they're choosing places with homes that have fiber.
Yeah.
And so we have several issues that we're trying to address, which are childcare, fiber, and housing. And they all play very closely together, and they're very much barriers to employment and barriers to growth for us. So this is a really important tool, and we're really glad you're all here because you can help
Great
us
turnout.
solve this problem and help us figure out what it is that you all want to see for your area here. So thank you.
So Todd, would you say a solid number 2 for the second biggest crowd at a public meeting we've done? I think so. Charles City, I think, has you beat. They had like 45 people when we did this, but that's true. That's right. Per capita, you win. Give yourselves a round of applause.
No, Adair was pretty good.
Adair did well. That's true. Adair, for as small as it is, they had that room, that city council chambers packed. Yes, I'm sorry. I'll come right back to you. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
I attended your meetings with the city and the county, and I sensed a lack of enthusiasm among some of the figures of authority in both of those bodies. Even if we come up with surveys showing a need and a want, can the people in authority say no or just refuse to move forward?
Great point. I'll repeat the question for anybody that's online. And she mentioned that maybe a lack of enthusiasm among maybe some of the public officials in the community. And could they stop an effort to do this? Well, one thing that's important to remember, if Todd and I had $5 million or $8 million laying around right now, and we wanted to come and build a fiber network in Red Oak, Iowa, we can do that. We got to get permits. We're probably going to have to get a franchise agreement. Rights of way access, all that stuff. But the city can't say, no, we don't want you. The city also can't, there is no such thing as an exclusive franchise, for example. So Mediacom couldn't say, no, you can't come to Red Oak, Iowa. But there's a difference between that and having support, right? So if the only way to make this happen were to be some sort of public investment, then those city leaders are going to have a lot to say about whether that happens. Now, citizens have a lot to say about that too, right? Because you have the right to request a referendum if you want to. But I'm not suggesting you're even close to going there. It's just that I think that, you know, the hesitancy you're probably sensing is based on past experience and issues that, you know, this is not the first time around. It didn't work out then. And probably just they've got a lot of irons in the fire, and that this might just be considered any public investment might be a bridge too far. Every community is different.
However, the conversation, part of what we're trying to do is educate that this is your conversation as a community.
Right.
This is one snapshot of data in time, but it took Benton, Iowa 4 votes over how many years?
18
years. They repeatedly came back with the conversation, and there was a trend that became in the conversation to the point that the community took action. In Genoa, Iowa squeaked by with a 54-46 vote, and so it was thought by the community leaders that they shouldn't get in because the temperature of the community was not that great. But they did start with a backbone, and then I took that into retail with a partnership involving the private sector. To create a model by which they became comfortable with where they wanted to go, and then they did a 180 and went down 100% public.
Yeah.
That was 20 years.
Yeah.
It has to start sometime, to where you try to baseline your data about, and I understand there's been other projects in the past that there's been other investments behind the scenes that we're going to learn about in our conversations. We'll report back to the public about what infrastructure you do have. There's been a lot of people done a lot of good things. And so once you understand that your community is already making some investment, you start seeing a trend, and then you get momentum. It's about the only way to overcome it.
Yes?
I don't have Mediacom. I wonder what this would do to the people that work for Mediacom. Would they be upset and not be for this, or there would be jobs when they
That's a great question. What about employees that work for Mediacom now? This is one of their operational centers for southwest Iowa. Chances are, if you look at the service territory that those guys cover, those techs cover, You know, the Red Oak the amount of customers they lose in Red Oak probably would not mean they get kicked to the curb. It just means they're going to be spending more time working in other communities that are also part of that coverage area. Some of them may choose to go work elsewhere. Some of them may keep doing what they're doing. But yeah, chances are they would probably just be repurposed to other places in their system. There's plenty of work. Or in the profession, yeah. Yes?
Part of that, if I could jump in.
Yeah.
We're not collecting this information for any one entity.
Right.
So the information we get, MediaCom has just as much access to that to use it, to expand if they wanted to our customers. If they choose to do so or not, we can't tell. But we're not doing this to hurt MediaCom. We have no animosity towards their current established connections.
Yeah, that's really important to understand. This is not anti-anybody, it's pro-you. And it's pro-solving a problem. If one of the incumbent carriers steps up and says, we want to help solve the problem, hallelujah. We're just telling you from our experience, that's not always a good option because they're restrained.
The other thing I want to make sure that everyone understands that Curtis and I don't build networks. We are municipal people. We are purposely built our client base around the communities that want to take action.
Right.
That's why we created this Community Broadband Action Network as a front door for communities to start having the conversation. And the ones that are active and want to be champions in their community can join with other champions to learn how to do that. Because we think that that's what has been a barrier.
Right.
Been people seeing themselves as in an isolated market instead of an integrated problem to solve.
Right.
And that's one of the things that any problem can get solved if enough information is shared. And we have carriers and people that are just doing advertising to try to get to your communities to say that we are here. Now, it might not be that they want to be in Red Oak, but they are in other communities taking a look at the conversations that are happening. And I would say that that's how Dubuque is going to get anything done.
Right.
Because they started getting vocal online about an agreement.
That's how it started with Ames.
That's how it started with Ames.
Now,
You would think that
obviously a lot bigger
how
communities,
are you,
but
you've had better in the county here than downtown Ames has had for the last ever.
absolutely. Yeah. Yes?
I'm untable this concept, just back to the overall concept, and how can that do the electrical development across the United States? There's and this is not political, but there was a very famous politician who grew up in very rural Texas in the 1920s, very, very poor. When he came to prominence, he saw that the only way to break the cycle of poverty and advance the people he grew up with was to bring rural electrification and education and access opportunities to people. That was Lyndon James Johnson, and he electrified rural Texas and looked at Texas. People are flocking to Texas and are prospering in Texas. That's not a statement about Lyndon James Johnson's vision of the need to connect people.
Yep.
So I think better, we need to have a vision of what's the next step, of what's going to move us forward. And then I'm also working on the rebranding process for Red Oak survey of things we've taken out, and just to maybe tip our hat. The feedback is that people want Red Oak to, what one thing is you want Red Oak to be known for. Welcoming, a great place to live, and progressive. If we don't do this, we'll never achieve those visions. We need to move forward. We need to thrive, share, care, and grow together. And this is a huge opportunity.
By the way, you used the word progressive, and you used it in the true sense of the word, not the politically progressive, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth, whatever. You're talking about communities that plot a path forward and don't let anything get in the way to do it. Like I said, I cut my teeth in Spencer, Iowa, a very politically a conservative area, but when the community came together to get something done, they got it done. And politics were set aside.
And that's part that people also say they want to see a strong, unified setup.
Right.
And giving access to everyone's network and everyone in our county would be the way to do it.
Right.
And I appreciate that comment, Maggie, because especially with education, during our county supervisors meeting, some of those of you that attended, we heard someone talk about the fact that they have 2 megabytes of data on their phone. They live out in the country out by Coburg, and their children, to do their homework, once they would plug in their hotspot and their computer to do their homework, and it was done, then they had to drive them into town to sit at the library to do their homework. And so as we talk about an education, like increasing our education level and providing educational opportunities to all of our students, every student, no matter what socioeconomic class, we have to have fiber to every property, because if we just rely on neighborhoods of people that are willing to pay for the service to come to them, we're excluding many rental properties here in our community. We have a very high rental property. About 700 properties are rentals. So I just want to make sure that every child and every household has the opportunity to have access to really good fiber and Wi-Fi services. So, and with regard to education, another piece, if any of you have ever taken a course online and you're in the process of taking an exam and your power goes or your internet goes down, you're done. You can't finish your exam. And you've got more and more young folks going to school online or increasing, getting a master's degree by doing it online. We can provide them that opportunity, living right here in our wonderful community of Red Oak. We have lakes, we have wonderful parks, we have the Wilson Performing Arts Center, we have the YMCA, the Viking Center, the Axe Murder House, the whole county. We have so many assets that this is a quality of life place to live. It is close to the metro. Sometimes that's a hindrance to us, but it's also an asset for us. So we can attract young folks, specifically those 30-year-olds who are tired of the hubbub of living downtown or living in the suburbs, ready to come find a quality of life place where they can have great education for their students, where they can have the quality of life to hunt, to feel safe in their community, to walk the trails. We have that. We have what they want. We just need to be able to provide that particular service with housing, with childcare, and dedicate our efforts in marketing to attracting them.
The whole package.
In the whole county,
Yeah.
Absolutely. So.
Larry?
Are there differences between implementation and funding of broadband networks within Red Oak as compared to rural areas around Red Oak?
Good question. Differences in funding and implementation between urban Red Oak and rural Red Oak, as we would maybe say, and there are significant ones because, as I mentioned before, there are funding streams available for those rural areas because they're considered unserved or underserved, and FMTC is hoping to tap into that to build those networks. Those same funding streams are not available inside Red Oak. So as much as they may want to, there's just not the cash to do it in Red Oak without some other method, some other pathway, some other funding source. So we're hoping that this information will help us frame together a way to figure out where those investments may come from, and so we can help facilitate that.
And that's part of my job is to find those unique and really interesting tools that can be put together to package to make that happen. So.
What's interesting is rural networks, like would be built outside of town, are more expensive to build per customer because there's just fewer customers. The construction might go a little quicker though, just because there's less things to go around and less streets to bore under, and et cetera, et cetera. And in town, the cost to serve a particular customer in bulk is less, but it's a lot slower to do because now you're working around trees and river, gardens and sewers and all those things. There's a lot of stuff underground if you're building an underground network, and if you're going overhead, then you have to deal with the electric company and get permission to be on their poles and make all that stuff happen. So different challenges in both areas.
It's more expensive to build out the inside of town than it is outside, even though it costs more per mile to lay the fiber.
Right. More connections.
More connections, yeah.
When you mentioned coming to parts of town, has it been your experience that you see when this happens, it happens all at once in the town, or is it pretty common that you see it come into a part of town,
Yeah.
then years later you see it in another part of town?
It is very common to see that, and the reason that happens is just the economics of a provider might need to run, say, fiber through a community because they have a large customer that is going to be a good customer, and they're willing to extend their network to them. Or there's a cell phone tower that needs service. So in a lot of cases, what happens then is that fiber has to be built, so that provider will say, well, I'm going to pass by these 5 or 10 businesses, I'm going to see if they want service. So that's very commonplace in communities of your size around the state. And that's because it's easier justification for that provider financially. It's a much harder justification to build a network to an entire community and spend $3,500, $4,000 per home to put fiber there, unless you're willing to write a check for $3,500, in which case maybe we can make that work. But you know what I'm saying, because you got to get that money back in revenue from that customer over a much longer period of time. Other questions, observations, thoughts?
Is this like all-encompassing, and it has to be all the 623 area type thing, both rural and city, or is there a way to kind of separate?
The phase project.
Yeah, it might have to be. I mean, the end goal would be everybody.
If the rural area has the funding, why should the rural area be slowed down?
No, absolutely not.
Because the city can't jump in.
No, you wouldn't, and Montgomery County, MCDC doesn't have any control over that. If that funding arrives and that network gets built, that's a win. It's not the World Series, but wow, we maybe just won the won our first playoff game or whatever. So you would never say, nope, sorry, don't build in the rural unless you'll build in the city, because that's still better than what you have now.
Yeah, because the thing that's really frustrating to me is when you showed that map, my house is literally right on the edge of Griswold's phone co-op / internet service provider, and nothing.
And nothing, yeah. Yeah, lines on a map are very arbitrary, and if you're on the wrong side, it kind of stinks. I'll give you an example. I live in Grimes, Iowa, which is one of those fast-growing suburbs of Des Moines. And in Grimes, I live on the south part of town. It's a newer housing development. The houses there were built about 4 years ago. So I have fiber to the home from CenturyLink, of all people, at my house in Grimes. And I get gigabit service. It's $95 a month with tax. And I'm happy as a clam. 3 blocks north of me, that area of the housing development, was built about 2 years before my house. They can get 7 meg DSL, because when CenturyLink got to that part where they're building in that neighborhood, it was cheaper to run fiber, so they ran fiber. In the neighborhood 2 blocks north, when they did that, they weren't building fiber, so those folks are stuck with older copper networks and DSL. So there's an example of haves and have-nots 2 blocks from each other in a town. And you have that very commonplace in urban areas and rural areas, where you'll have when I was house hunting here a couple of years ago, a house I really liked, well, the only provider I could get there is CenturyLink, and 7 meg DSL was the best they could deliver. Well, why isn't Mediacom here? Well, Mediacom didn't come build this development because there wasn't enough homes there to justify the construction cost. So there's an example where one choice is as good as none if it's not a good choice. Yes, sir.
I have a question on the FMTC is going to start in 2 weeks to build out the fiber south along Broadway and then downtown, it'll be done by January. So have they already done a survey and they determined that they have a customer demand there to do this project? Or are they going to build and then ask customers along the way if they will want to buy into this project? I mean, they've already determined this is a cost justifiable project.
Right. They're pretty smart people. They wouldn't be investing that if there weren't going to be business there.
So how do people along this area, they're going to have fiber? And that's all businesses and anybody who buys into it?
Right. I don't know the answer to that. I really don't.
Anyone here from FMTC?
You know,
You did. You can call them later.
Build down to the businesses, because that's the logical choice, right?
Right.
Well,
And that's not uncommon.
typically businesses are relying on at least two carriers. That's the other thing, is homes can get by with one, and there's an easier way to assume a business model in a business district, because you're more than willing to pay for that reliability.
So what do you call a business? One PC is a business? A home-based business could have a PC too. How do you define a business?
Well, I think it's more just a business district of
Yeah,
that.
it's more just
Yeah.
commercial properties.
And those willing to pay. So you can get hooked up now, and or you can wait and see how it works.
I mean-
No guarantees, right?
Well, the goal would be to figure out some way that you won't have to make that choice. That there's a way for it to be available everywhere, not just the businesses necessarily.
How can we expand this idea, this concept, if people want to pay? And I mean, how
That's
much would people want to pay and expand this concept?
That's a good question.
That's
That's
what-
the point of the survey, is to find out how much people are willing to pay. You know, because
Or split.
Yeah, or how important it is to
First
them.
thing is, would you split?
Yeah, right. So it's all got to be part of a much bigger picture financially, and that money's got to come from somewhere. So those are all the questions that have to be
FTC has already decided they're going to do broadband.
in those areas, yeah. But that's much smaller dollar cost than it would be to build the whole town.
And they're doing that to customers who are willing to
Pay for it, yeah. Yeah, you
And the idea is that when you run it down through a business district, the hookup fees are taken care of by the corporation,
Company, yeah.
That wants to do it. And so if you have a hookup fee that's $1,200-$1,500 hookup fee, that can be absorbed by that large company or that middle-income company easier. But if you go out into a community and you have $1,200-$1,500 to a home, you know, all
Yeah.
of a sudden, the amount of penetration that you're going to get into residential area is significantly smaller than the penetration you're going to get into a business community that can pay for those hookup fees and pay the extra money.
And the goal I have is to figure out the financing so all, we don't have to have that type of model where it's just, it would be installed to everyone, that it's an essential and necessary utility for everywhere in the community.
So if we fill out this survey, it might show how much interest they have.
Absolutely. You're.
or if you hate the idea, you should tell us that too.
I have a list of what.
Okay.
Because if we can show that the majority of people are interested in the service, then that helps us look at what is the cost of building it out and what funding sources are there and how can we work with the partner to get it done.
Right.
So,
Yes.
Doesn't the school and the hospital and such already have fiber optics?
Yes, they do.
Are they from a different entity then, or?
I believe that, well, we just had a meeting with the hospital today, and they've been working with farmers for a long time. And they are extremely well served, and they're very, very happy. In fact, they've been partners in that effort. So I'm not sure about the schools, but yeah.
Another thing is that we live in the south side of town, and there's a fiber optic that goes right down the street in front of our house.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes to the cell phone tower.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
is that a separate entity also, or is that farmers that's doing that?
Don't know. Yep.
I was just wondering, if we could get 2 or 3 different fiber optics in town, how are you gonna figure out which one goes where and all that?
Well, it's got to, so if, just because a fiber runs by your house doesn't mean they can just go out there and hook you up to it. It's got to be designed for that, right? So a fiber from point to point is designed differently than a fiber network that connects many, many, many points. So while a fiber like that might play a role in a bigger network later on if it's built, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily configured that they could run a drop and give you service.
I just wondered how much of a problem it's gonna be to run two fibers in the same trench or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
One cut the other and whatever when they're working it.
Right. Well, they usually put this stuff in duct, and they're very careful. And the underground construction, assuming it's underground, is these guys are very good at what they do. It's the other utilities that are slow to get their lines located, or they hire a locator based on the lowest cost bid, and they're like, yeah, I think the cable's somewhere in here. Okay, I'll just draw a line. They don't actually go and bother to locate it. That's the headaches. That causes headaches for anybody doing new underground construction, whether it's a fiber network or city running water lines or whatever. Yeah, we're gonna wrap up pretty soon. A couple more questions. Want to make sure people get to bed at a decent hour.
You mentioned FFTC a lot.
Yeah.
Just in full disclosure, are you in any way have a relationship with FFTC?
I do not.
Does your company have any relationship with them?
Absolutely not. I know some of the people, and I've known them for a few years, and they have an excellent reputation in the business, but no dollars changing hand. I work for her and the MDCC board and the 623 committee, so I don't work for the city, I work for them. So that's why when we ask, well, will the city try to run interference on that? I don't know, I don't work for them, so.
So how do you see your work coming to a conclusion here? Do you come to a summary judgment that you then get back to the MCDC?
Judgment's a little harsh, but we will, basically, once we've got enough survey results, we're going to start crunching some numbers there and do some analysis on what that really means. We're doing meetings like we did today at the hospital. We're doing 3 meetings with smaller groups tomorrow, the ag community at 7. We've got a business, education and public sector, and then we've got a kind of a evening event for businesses, small business owners. So if any of you are business owners, you won't have to put up with this tomorrow. I'm not going to do the full dog and pony tomorrow night, but that's at 5:30 at the restaurant.
At Firehouse Restaurant.
Firehouse.
And the Silo Bar and Grill, which is their new outdoor grill area.
The key word being bar,
Yep.
so you can have a drink.
This is anybody that's a farmer or has farmer friends, 7 a.m. tomorrow morning at the Agrivision. And then education and public sector, which would be our city and county government folks, any law enforcement. Because another thing we didn't even talk about is the value that fiber optics brings to smart community capacity
Yeah.
in the long term. I come from Lincoln, Nebraska, where we finished out fiber to every home and business, and now we're doing a green lights project where every stoplight is programmed, and if the fire alarm goes off, it actually they plug in where they're going, it will shut down every light while they're en route.
Yeah.
And if there's not cars that are at the stoplight, the light won't be turned. So it helps reduce pollution, it just improves transportation and traffic control. So there's all kinds of things that fiber optics can do for our community in the future, long term down the road too. So even beyond for home and business use, so.
Yeah, just
So circling back to what the use of the information is, we're gonna have the report will be given to the economic development
Right.
group, by which you will have your discussions about what the potentials are. Typically then, communities, if you want a transparent process, we have worked with other communities where we do what's called request for information, where providers are given that information. I don't know for sure that that's how it will be phased in here, but maybe they can do that directly on their own. But we're more than willing to say these are the important things to talk about with a potential partner, given the data that you have, and then whatever services are needed to help make something good happen.
Right.
It starts getting customized after that.
Exactly.
I think citizens' information and comments to our city and county leaders is very, very essential. show your interest in this and that it's important to you, they work for you. You're their constituents, so it's important that you voice your opinions to them. I think a lot of people shy away from doing that, but that's how we're set up, so please express your interest.
One more?
Shannon, how is the information about the agriculture farm and the business meetings being disseminated? Because I learned this morning just by happenstance, talking to another farmer, I'm a farm owner.
These are small focus groups that we invited, just a few number
Oh,
of
so
people
it's not,
to.
you don't want the whole public, well, how are you picking those people? This is only the large farmers that you're inviting, and that is not the big population of 60.
We picked based on organizations that we asked to help us find some people, so.
First of all, we need people.
Yeah.
So,
but we
Yeah.
need people to come to these, so.
in those targeted areas.
Yeah, in those
So we
targeted
try to find
areas.
it, we just ask to work with other groups.
It would have been best to go out with, that plans, all farmers,
Just to follow up on that, there's about 5 or 6 of us that have been active volunteers doing this in our free time, so we're not gonna get rid of that many. You're welcome to join us tomorrow morning.
but I've been very visible, and I never heard of it.
So don't forget to take the survey. Thank you for your input. And there are lots of opportunities to type comments on that survey. So spill your guts, it's fine.
That's what we'll go in the final report.
That's right. That'll all be presented in the final report anonymously. So no one will know you said what. Thank you, everybody.